So I'll continue talking and say a few words about the Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere of shared community. How about that? Why don't we just marry the two concepts? After all, in Japan, in recent years, people have spoken about, well, not only in Japan, Kevin Rudd, our former Prime Minister, and now in charge of policy research at the Asia Society over in New York, and many others have all tried to formulate some kind of series of words as well as some sort of regional collaboration that will make a peaceful, harmonious zone out of East and Southeast Asia, to create some sort of regional trading and diplomatic body that can ensure that peaceful trade, economic exchange, and the diplomatic courtesies can be pursued in the region. As many of my friends and colleagues here know, and you now are sadly aware, I come from an earlier generation where conflict was normal, and unresolved issues, one feels, will sooner or later be confronted one way or the other. I don't believe that Asia, East Asia, Southeast Asia, has resolved the issues of the Second World War. I believe that the co-prosperity sphere did collapse with Japan's defeat in the war, not due to the mass rebellion and fighting in China, but due to a couple of nuclear atom bombs dropped on Japanese cities and mass murder. The post-World War II arrangements in Asia have led to extraordinary economic and social and cultural development, decolonization, prosperity. However, many of the simmering issues that existed before the war and during the war remain, and they remain unresolved. Korean Peninsula is unresolved, Taiwan, mainland China is unresolved, territorial issues between China, Taiwan, Korea, Japan, unresolved, issues with Russia in the north of Japan, to the north of it, unresolved, Southeast China Sea issues involving Malaysia, Brunei, the Philippines, Vietnam, China, all unresolved, let alone other regional conflicts in South Asia and India, and so on and so forth. China, East Asia and Southeast Asia are not part of some European-style common union. They're not even headed in that direction. In fact, we are going to probably see a long period of disgruntlement and disturbance and adjustment in the years to come. I think what we've seen in the East China Sea and the South China Sea are mere preludes to much greater conflict. Perhaps not direct, but it will be a grinding type of conflict. In fact, I tend to sum up this conflict, as you'll see from my introduction to our yearbook. I tend to take a bit of a Maoist view of these things, which I know is not at all popular, but you know, I'm not in a popularity contest. I don't have to be. I have to be somebody who tries to think of, if certain things are happening in a certain way, how do we try and understand them in a fashion that makes greater sense than other ways of understanding them? And one of the ways I understand, for example, China's what people often regard as erratic behavior in the region over the last 3 or 4 years. This is again dealing with our community of shared destiny concept, and that relates to China's activities in East China Sea with its announcement of the air defensive zone in November 2013, and more recently the South China Sea, its creation of what the Americans, an American defense official so delightfully called the building of the Great Wall of Sand, the building up of these coral atolls and islands, something that's not unique to China. The Vietnamese have done, the Philippines have done similar things. The Chinese have just gone more all out and built probably much prettier installations there with military potential. Xi Jinping, as I've said, has used the term community of shared destiny some 62 times in formal speeches over the last 1.5 to 2 years. The Chinese official media has also praised him for engaging in what it calls acupuncture international relations, or acupuncture diplomacy, 点穴式外交. You'll see this in my introduction. Now, this is a form of diplomacy that is short, equitable, fast. He goes in somewhere, deals with one issue, discusses something with a foreign leader, and then goes on to the next country or returns to China. This is a much faster way of dealing with international issues than we saw under the lugubrious rule of Hu Jintao or during the highly over-performative era of Jiang Zemin. But I have suggested that this sort of application of acupressure, that is, sticking in of needles and fiddling around and opening up channels in the body through the flow of qi, this seems to be a method that Xi Jinping and his colleagues also pursue in the larger regional issues of the day. In fact, in the yearbook introduction, I say that I see in the way that China has been acting in East China and South China Seas, in its engagement with an issue, undertaking an action, then after a while causing great disturbance, a lot of a kerfuffle with America and its regional partners, then withdrawing. I see in this the typical type of Maoist approach to guerrilla warfare. And I quote Mao's famous dictum. It's called a 16字诀 in Chinese, a 16-character mantra on dealing with guerrilla warfare. And it's summed up in these words in Chinese: 敌进我退，敌驻我扰，敌疲我打，敌退我追. That is, when the enemy advances, we retreat. When the enemy makes camp, we harass. When the enemy is exhausted, we fight. And when the enemy retreats, we pursue. Now, I know it's slightly jokey to say that the whole Chinese foreign policy, it sometimes reflects this type of attitude, but I would say that Xi Jinping and his colleagues did, after all, grow up with Maoism, as did I. And that creating diplomatic disturbatory issues is a great way of unsettling accepted norms and opening up possibility for one's own strategic advantage. If you're familiar with the Chinese rhetoric regarding its recent building of the Great Wall of Sand in the South China Sea, in the Global Times or the People's Daily, if you go and read the major articles on the subject, you will come across such statements as, what we have done by engaging in new building projects in the South China Sea is to open up possibility to break through the loggerhead created over recent years in this area. Our activities make it possible to discuss anew all the issues of the South China Sea. Now, you would think that is completely illogical. By China moving in the South China Sea, building up these new bases and developing its interests, it's only set everybody's nerves on edge, made the Vietnamese alert, the Filipinos have gone crazy, the Malaysians are concerned, the whole region is disturbed. And recently China says, well, we've basically finished our building, withdrawing. Much relief to everybody. However, the Chinese point is that we believe we've changed the strategic and regional environment. You might not think so. That's because you don't understand things we do. Now, therefore, we have a complete and utter clash between Chinese rhetoric and its behavior and international perception. And that's something I think everyone's going to have to get used to living with, because that is when Xi Jinping and his colleagues speak about creating a new normal, a slower growth rate for the Chinese economy. They're also creating a new normal for China's global behavior. And that is, we will act in ways that make complete and utter logical sense to us. You might not like it. You might think we're creating a disturbance. We think we're actually creating an innovative and creative environment. And therefore, suck it up. And I just think you're all going to have, those of you who work on China, its regional diplomacy and its global affairs, you're all just going to have to get used to another way of both seeing and dealing with reality. You might not like it, but I think that's what we're facing. Anyway, I should now just say a couple of words. Up on the screen here, I have one of the maps from that article I've given you to read, published in quartz.com. This is the One Belt, One Road. Dare say you'll have many other lecturers who talk about this. And so I'm just putting it up there as some sort of wallpaper for you to consider. Because this is one of the ways that the Chinese are conceptualizing their economic and trade exchanges. 100 years ago, British political analysts said that in the 20th, 21st centuries, the long-term issues would be the creation of major trade routes and the revitalization of trade routes within Inner Asia. Inner Asia is here, and Inner Asia to Europe, and engagement with Russia. There's other maps in the article I've given you that show China's involvement with Russian gas pipelines and so on and so forth. and also China now engaging more directly with Africa and Latin America. This is all normal behavior for an expanding economic powerhouse like that of China. It is one that is challenging for its partners as well as with its competitors. And dare say, in the coming days in these lectures in the Two China series, you'll discuss many of these concerns. I'll be finishing this lecture today with just a few words about other elements of the Chinese rise that might be useful in your deliberations. As I said earlier, and to carry on from that discussion, China is in many ways a 19th century country. Although it's gone through a modern Republican revolution in the 1910s, through civil war, through periods of semi-democratization, through civil change, through radical socialization under the People's Republic, through revolutionary rhetoric, class struggle, and then collapse of the Cultural Revolution ethos after the death of Mao, and then through a period of massive economic and institutional reform while maintaining the primacy of a one-party state. In many ways, one should appreciate that the People's Republic, after all, is a country that's only been around for less than 70 years. Therefore, it's a young, very young country. It's a country that has been meaningfully engaged in global diplomacy and global affairs only since 1972-73, and more actively since 1978, so 30, 40 years. I don't excuse anything, it's not in my interest to do so or concern, but if you consider the People's Republic as being an engaged global entity for only 30 or 40 years, it does help one understand why it acts in certain ways that it acts. Also, to consider if it's a 19th century new nation state-like country, then one thinks of other countries of that era, in particular Italy, with its rise of nationalism and its creation of a unified government under the revivalism of the 1850s, 60s, 70s. One thinks of Prussia leading Germany to create a modern polity that became the modern German state under Bismarck in the 1870s and 80s. And one thinks of the very troubled, extremely troubled and fraught history of France from the period of the 1790s right through its various republics to create its modern polity, a long, stressed, strained period of rebellion, revolution, collapse. One thinks even of America, which after all, after its revolution, went through a great period of unsettled change and development, and then eventually over a whole range of issues to do with race and to do with economics and to do with regional conflict, it went through one of the most disastrous civil wars in modern history. Now, all of these countries have gone through long periods of change and development in which rabid nationalism, extremist rhetoric, and also military behavior were the norm. So on one level, China, despite, even with its communism, its communist party, its one-party state, acts in many ways like a 19th century country, a new nation state. As I said, this is not, I'm not saying this to forgive anything or to make it, to give China any advantage. It's just, if one sees it in such terms, sometimes such a perspective allows us to make more sense of the behavior of the People's Republic. Sadly, at the same time, China is a one-party state ruled by a non-elected, they call selected, so-called meritocracy. I don't believe it's particularly a meritocracy. I think it's a cabal of leaders who are related through economic primacy, advantage, infighting, party and family relationships. It is a closed system. It is built on a series of major social, political, and cultural lies about its past and its present, and it does not abide investigation into any of these areas. For example, and I discuss this with my colleagues here frequently, who knows what the budget of the Communist Party of China is? Who knows how much it makes each month out of party fees? Who knows, does it pay rent for the thousands of properties in prime real estate in every major city and town in China? Does it pay for any of that? How does it pay for its utility bills? What does it pay in taxes? What's its relationship economically with the the state system of the People's Republic of China. Just this month, in June, the Chinese government has declared that the Beijing municipality will be removed from Beijing and relocated to Tungzhou. So the party will now occupy, like a big fat toad, the very center of Beijing, while the actual government that runs the city will be banished to the outlying suburbs of Tungzhou far to the east. How's that arranged? Who pays for what? Where's the money come from? Or as Zhurongji said, where's the money come from? Where's the money go? We don't know. So the basic things that determine the Communist Party's economic behavior and allow it to act as it acts are complete and utter state secrets. How can one not be a little bit suspicious of the very system that runs China? Anyway, as I said, China is also run by a one-party state that believes in its core, and if you want to go and look up its endless twitterings on the subject of what it calls core socialist values, and this is something that has been a very important part of Xi Jinping's rise to power, emphasis on the Hu Jintao era core socialist values. It is underpinned by a radical materialist philosophy, i.e., all human activity, ideas and behaviors are determined by the material world. There's no belief in abstract, as I said earlier, abstract humanity, abstract value, abstract human rights, or idealism. If this is the case, it means that cynical behavior, materially oriented policies, and short-termism and exploitation of resources for the betterment of those who are in power are the norm and not the exception. It makes no room for the world described, as I said earlier, described at great length in Pope Francis's recent Laudato Si encyclical, in which a whole alternative anti-technocratic, anti-materialist worldview is articulated clearly and at great length. In considering, as I bring this talk to an end in this rather disheveled fashion, sorry I haven't gone on further about One Belt, One Road because I know you'll all get more than enough of all of that during the lectures to come. But as we consider the rise of China on the world stage and realize that it is completely and utterly imbricated, that is overlapping with and engaged with constant conversation, conflict, discussion and dialectical struggle with the United States of America, its alternative other, the other it wants to be, if we consider that, then I think it's very useful to think back as China expands itself and its influence East China and the South China Sea. I think it's very useful to think back to the type of rhetoric and bravado that we saw evident in America in our new century, the beginning of the new century. After September 11th, you recall that there was a rise of neocon influence in America as it launched invasions of Afghanistan and the extraordinary, one might even one day say unprecedented disaster of the invasion of Iraq. Neocons claimed that they were changing reality by transforming the world. In fact, in October 2004, the New York Times magazine published an article in which a famous neocon commentator remarked in the following way about America. "We're an empire now," he said, "and when we act, we create our own reality. And while you, i.e. journalists, academics, commentators, and while you are studying that reality, judiciously perhaps as you will, we will act again, and we will create other new realities. You can study those as well. And that's how things are going to be sorted out. We are history's actors. And you, all of you, you'll be left to study what we do." Now, it's a statement of extraordinary bravado, but it is one that was believed by neocons then, just as it is believed today by neocons, just as it is believed by, I think, people in my own government here, the right-leaning government under our Prime Minister Tony Abbott. I believe they are of this similar mindset that we can change reality through the way we speak and act. And I believe also China is doing the same type of thing. It will change reality in a way that allows the rest of us to study it and it will probably do so in ways that may well be just as disastrous as America has been in the last number of decades. In fact, as China becomes a major world power, it will learn, to its cost and to its horror and its shame, just exactly what the cost of being a world power is. The British discovered it, the French discovered it, the Russians learnt about it, the Americans have paid a very heavy price for it, although they've benefited immeasurably, and the whole world has also paid a price. And that's what I think I should end my conversation and discussions with, that point. Thank you.